Hi guys, it's Kirsty. Today's video is more one for the ladies because it is about when our OCD or anxiety seems to get a bit worse around that time of the month. And when I say that time of the month, I do of course refer to when we are just before our periods or when we're on our periods. But before I get into that, I'd like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So female OCD sufferers may have noticed, or they may not, but some may have noticed that maybe just before their period, around about the time when one may expect to experience a bit of PMT, so for some of us, PMT may mean low mood, or it may mean that we're a little bit extra irritable, a little bit less patient perhaps, or just feeling extremely tired and worn out. But some of us may experience an increase in our OCD or anxiety symptoms around about this time. And if you were to look into this and Google it, you'd see that this isn't uncommon. There's certain studies that have taken place where it has been found that a high proportion of women asked if their OCD symptoms increase around about that time of the month say yes. So I am not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know 100% why this would be the case, because obviously we don't necessarily have 100% certainty about why we have OCD in the first place. We know that there's probably a genetic component where we have a predisposition towards it. We also know that there may be certain life events and way things have gone for us that may kind of trigger it to kind of come into action where it may have been dormant. And the same applies for why our OCD or anxiety symptoms may get worse at that time of the month. There are some ideas about why, but of course we don't have 100% certainty. So with looking at why we get PMT in the first place, it's generally put down to spikes in certain hormones and changes in hormone levels. And as we know, there is a stress hormone called cortisol that when there's a higher amount of cortisol, we tend to feel more anxious. It's known as the stress hormone. So if we know that hormones are affected by time of the month and, certain hormones are higher than others, then I suppose it's not a surprise that there may be a little bit of imbalance for us. Maybe our levels of cortisol are slightly higher, or it may be because we're more tired or we're lower of mood and that triggers us more. There's no 100% certain explanation for it, but there are kind of articles online that allude to the fact that it may be because our cortisol levels are slightly increased. Personally, for me, I found that where my mood may have been slightly lower and I may have been a little bit less patient around certain times of the month, that would trigger my OCD because I would link it to other things. So because of the way because my OCD was centered around, it was centered around relationship at some points. It was centered around my health at some points. I very much was kind of keeping an extremely close eye on my mental health at all times and my mood at all times, whether it was low or whether I was feeling anxiety. And that is something that's common amongst all of us who have OCD or anxiety, that we are highly aware of all of our feelings because we tend to kind of be checking to see if it's still there, and we're just keeping an eye on ourselves and analysing our internal feelings. So if around about that time of the month we find we're sort of, we're noticing that we're feeling a certain way, it might trigger us more. And then once we're triggered, then maybe we indulge in compulsions a bit more. So can you see where there may be a link between, our mood and then a spike in our sort of intrusive thoughts, and then perhaps a spike in our likelihood to perform compulsions? So whatever the reason it may be behind why your OCD or anxiety may feel worse around that time of the month, whether it's before or during your period, there are some things that you can do to kind of help yourself with. So the point of this video is so that I can offer some tips in terms of how to deal with it. So I wanted to kind of draw upon my own experience with it, just to offer a few tips just to help to make it a little bit easier, because obviously that time of the month isn't necessarily the most pleasant as it is anyway. And then of course add a spike in your OCD to that, or your anxiety to that, and it can make it feel 10 times worse. So firstly, I think that forewarned is forearmed. So knowledge is power, essentially. So after, if you're somebody who does find that your symptoms worsen around about this time, please know that you're not alone. If you online, you can see that it's quite common in the OCD recovery WhatsApp groups. You'll quite often see the ladies kind of mentioning, or somebody new to the group might say, does anybody notice it gets worse? And everyone's like, oh my God, it gets so much worse. Yes. You might see it on OCD forums or on support groups. It's again mentioned in the OCD recovery Facebook support group. Some of the ladies ask about it. So you're not alone. Firstly, it's not uncommon. And if you do feel a spike in your symptoms around about that time, you can know that there's a very strong chance it could be down to the time of the month. So if we know this, firstly, that's something something less to fear about it. So if we know that it may be to do with our period, then we know to expect it. So as we're coming to that time of the month, if we're kind of expecting it to get worse, then the less of a surprise it is, the better. So, if you're somebody, if you know that your period is going to be around about the time of, something that's also likely to trigger you. So for example, if you are somebody who suffers from ROCD and you've got a wedding coming up in 2 weeks time, and you are also due on your period in a couple of weeks time, you can be prepared for the fact that OCD is gonna, it may come in full force. But if you're prepared, then you know to bring it along for the ride, you know to invite it along. So that's kind of the first thing that I wanted to mention in terms of tips for how to deal with when it gets worse, is knowing that it probably will. If it's something that's happened with you before, know that it most likely will for the next period, and expect to feel a bit worse, so it's less of a surprise, and it's and you can bring it along with you. It's like, as Rob talks in many of his videos, wearing anxiety like an uncomfortable coat. You know that coat is going to be extra uncomfortable that time of the month. Don't cancel your plans or anything, like, again, like when you're having spikes in OCD or anxiety generally, don't be cancelling your plans. Bring it along for the ride. Now, another tip that I wanted to bring up, and this one's going to sound a bit bizarre, but I wanted to just suggest the idea of using it to your advantage. So obviously we know that exposure therapy is the gold standard treatment for OCD. And a big part of OCD recovery is not avoiding, and it's not avoiding triggers. It's exposing ourselves to the things that we fear, and showing our minds that we're not afraid, showing our OCD that it's irrelevant. What is throwing out is irrelevant. So if we know that there's kind of a certain time of month where our OCD is likely, or anxiety, if it's somebody suffering from GAD as well, that it's likely to be worse at that time of the month, bring it on. use it to your advantage. Make sure you're definitely not avoiding, because you can use this spike in your anxiety to really sort of, really as an opportunity to show ourselves that we're not afraid. It's the same principle as, when you've got things that come along in your life that are going to happen anyway, but they trigger you, and it's like making the most of this. Okay, great, this is going to be a good trigger. I know this is, exposing myself to this is going to be the way to, push towards getting better. The only way to get over it is to go through it. So if we know that our OCD is going to get worse this time of the month, we know that that's an opportunity for us to, potentially get even more better. If we take this opportunity to expose ourselves to the feelings of discomfort that time of the month might bring on for us, and we refuse to give in and do compulsions or avoidances, we're getting a kind of an exposure without having to do anything, and we can choose to prevent a response, whether that response is an overt compulsion, or whether that response is an avoiding doing something, being around someone or being around something, or even if it's mental rumination, if you can, try not to analyze why you're feeling a certain way. So using this time of the month as an exposure where you have this opportunity, bear with me, you have this opportunity to feel extra uncomfortable in terms of how you feel mentally. So every time we allow ourselves to feel uncomfortable when we suffer from anxiety or OCD, we are accepting those feelings. And the more we're accepting, the less we're putting up resistance. The less we're putting up resistance, the more our brain sees that it's not dangerous, and we're not responding to the sirens going off, the danger alerts, and so the less it needs to be sending the danger alerts. So if we use this time as an opportunity to not, don't give in to it, essentially, then we're getting to kind of, expose ourselves more to being uncomfortable. So I hope those tips are useful. I know it is unpleasant, because obviously that time of the month does also come with some physical, we can get some physical discomfort as well, with cramps. So it's never pleasant, and OCD is not pleasant, as we well know, but we don't need to be making it worse by kind of, I suppose there might be a tendency to feel, obviously where we feel emotional when it's that time of the month, to maybe feel sorry for ourselves. And feeling sorry for ourselves isn't helpful in OCD recovery. Self-compassion, on the other hand, acknowledging what we're going through and having your own back and, giving yourself a bit of praise when you're doing well, etc. Really good. Acknowledging our own suffering, important, being kind to ourselves, but feeling sorry for ourselves and saying, oh, I don't really know, it's horrible, it's awful, I feel even worse, that is not going to be helpful, because the fact of it is that you're feeling like you are feeling worse at that time of the month, but you don't want to be letting that hold you back from your recovery. So that's why I'm wanting to offer just a couple of tips surrounding it in terms of how to approach it. It's more like suggesting the attitude to take towards it. In terms of actions, as I said, don't avoid, use it as an opportunity to not react to the extra uncomfortable feelings, and know that while you feel uncomfortable, you're getting further towards your recovery bit by bit, slowly, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. So I hope this video has been somewhat helpful. If nothing else, then simply just to hopefully help you feel less alone if your symptoms do get worse around that time of the month. But thank you very much for watching, and take care. Bye.